just heat up by yourself, force your body to heat up by itself, that is also going to activate your brown fat and your muscles even more, and that increases your metabolism. It's like a workout, your after workout, after your cold plunge.
Dr. Susanna Søberg, welcome to The Genius Life.
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me. I'm so excited to be here.
Of course. I was so delighted to have met you in LA when you were here recently, and I was bummed that we didn't get to do this in person, but across the ether of the internet, I'm pumped that we now get to have this conversation and bring it to my audience, because you're a brilliant scientist, expert, and I'm excited to go deep into all things cold water immersion, cold showers, winter swimming, all the things that you so eloquently study and talk about. So I guess off the top, if someone were to start taking cold showers every day, what would be the benefits to doing so?
Thank you so much for that introduction. I'll see if I can live up to all that during this interview. So if a person was to choose what to do for some kind of like cold exposure, there are different ways you can start this. There are people who just jump right into it with cold water immersions up to the neck, and other people might want to start with something that is a little bit more light, or an easier way to transition into getting more comfortable with being uncomfortable in the cold. So starting off with a cold shower is actually a very good idea, as you just suggested. So taking a cold shower for maybe just a few seconds, and then build it up to maybe 30 seconds over a course of a month would be an ideal way to like go slowly, gentle to your nervous system. And then you have built some sort of a cold adaptation to your body. And then you can also move on to a cold water immersion. And with that, you will have some other benefits. So, and this is all about what parts of your nervous system that you are activating.
And there's a range of types of cold exposure, right? Maybe you can walk us through like the different types, just so we have clarity in terms of like the verbiage, the vernacular. You know, we have cold showers. The terms.
Yeah. So you can do cold showers. I often say what I call winter swimming, because that is like the term that we use in Scandinavia. My book is also called Winter Swimming, but what I really mean by that is just cold exposure as a broad term. So that could be walking outside in a t-shirt, so getting cold exposure by air. That is also a way to activate your metabolism. And that is kind of like my expertise, because I have a PhD in metabolism and specifically in cold and heat exposure. So how to activate our nervous system and our metabolism in that way. So you can use cold air, cold water immersions. That could be cold showers. It could also be submerging hands and feet into cold water. And also your face could also be a way. It will not give you all the benefits that you get from cold water immersion. So there's like different ways you can do this as a gentle way, and there's also the full-on way, which would be the cold water immersion. So maybe it's like a ladder you can climb.
I like that analogy. So, I mean, a lot of people today, myself included, I spend a lot of time in the setting of climate control. Like my home is chronically climate controlled. Then I step out into my car. My car has a climate control system. And I'm assuming that's fairly dissonant with the way our ancestors evolved, over millennia. Like we didn't have HVAC units, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, chronic cooling. What happens physiologically to the body when the temperature starts to drop?
So when the temperature starts to drop in the body, you will activate your what is called your healthy brown fat. So that's going to activate your that's going to activate your metabolism, and that will increase your heat in the body. So when you activate brown fat, that's going to increase heat, so you don't freeze to death, because the body is going to react as if this is the worst case scenario. Of course, if you then go out in the cold wind and it's just a little bit cold, you will have a little bit of a lower activation of your nervous system. But then if you submerge into ice cold water, you will have like a huge activation of your nervous system. So that is the cold receptors in the skin that sends a signal to the brain, where the brain, in the brain, there's a center, temperature regulating center, which signals how cold is this. And the set point there will always be the one to like regulate from where you were to where you are now. So if you submerge into cold water, there will be a huge temperature difference on your skin to the cold water. And that's going to increase noradrenaline. Noradrenaline is part of our catecholamine, so our stress system, and activating what is called also the sympathetic nervous system and our fight and flight system. So noradrenaline will be released in the brain and in your blood and activate our brown fat cells. There are receptors specifically on the brown fat cells, beta-adenogenic receptors, if we want to be a little bit nerdy about that. But and they are specifically, you can say, receiving noradrenaline, and that's going to activate the brown fat immediately. So it takes a few minutes even to just get full activated. So it depends on the temperature, of course, that you're exposed to. So there is also a range there. So a little bit of cold wind on the skin, in your face, if you go outside, is going to release a little bit of activation just to keep that balance in your body. So you can see the brown fat as the first regulator or rescuer in your body to make sure that your temperature is just right for your vital organs.
Wow. And where do we tend to carry this brown fat?
So this specific brown fat is, I call it an organ. And when I say that, I can hear that most people are thinking, oh, it's just one place, it's just one big lump sitting somewhere. But it's actually in different places in the body. And from what we know from research, and there's a nice paper published in 2016, where a group of scientists have made these PET-CT overlays of their subjects. And this is the way we measure brown fat in humans, that is with PET-CT scannings. And from that, we can see where the brown fat is located. And they found 6 places where it is located and where we can also grow it. So these different subjects in this study showed that they had brown fat a little bit different places, but the same location. So they had just a little bit, some had less and some had more, but it really showed that you can grow some brown fat as well. So the biggest depot we have is located under our supraclavicular bones, and is about a handful. And we also have it around our heart and our kidneys, and down the spine. That is very close. Everything is very close to our central nervous system, which is very clever from nature's side, because if you were supposed to go outside, imagine our ancestors going outside and it was super cold, and it was probably cold a lot of the times. So our nervous system is really the first to give the message to the brown fat to increase the heat in the body. And how it does that is by noradrenaline activating the brown fat cells, and that's going to release heat as the outcome of that. And that, for the brown fat cells to keep being activated, it has to like take glucose and fatty acids from the bloodstream in order for it to be fuel to keep the heat up. So in that way, we will get rid of some sugar and some fat from the bloodstream. And that is why scientists today are researching this full on to see if we can use this as a new way, a new organ, you can say, to combat obesity and type 2 diabetes in this world. I mean, we need new strategies. Some people say we don't, but we do. We do need something else. And what I have researched is how we can, in a behavioral manner, use this organ to get healthier.
That's amazing. So this is actually like a beneficial fat, a fat that for all intents and purposes, we should want to carry more of in our bodies.
Exactly. Yeah, we would really want to have more. It's not like we can grow a full arm of brown fat. It's not in that, that's not possible. But it is possible actually to grow some more. And we have seen that in studies as well. I will give you an example, which is also not that extreme actually. It depends on who you are. Again, how comfortable comfortable you normally are in the cold or comfortable in your environment. But there's a nice study showing that if you sleep in a cold room for a month, you will increase the amount of brown fat that you have. Let me just tell you the study. So they had subjects coming in. So they were obese and had type 2 diabetes. And they slept in a room for a month that was 24 degrees. And they measured the brown fat, both the amount and the activity. And then the next month, they asked the subjects to sleep in a cold room at 19 degrees Celsius. And there they saw that the brown fat volume was actually increased. So you really want to have more brown fat, because then you can activate your metabolism and increase that even more. So we want more of the good fat, so we can call it good fat. In the next month, they slept warmer again at 24 degrees, measured the brown fat, and saw that it was decreased again. And then they slept at 27 degrees Celsius, and there was not much to see in those pictures. But I think the point is here that even small behavioral changes, sleeping in a colder room than you usually do, will actually keep your body metabolism a little bit up, because it's also so many hours you're sleeping there. So and just by exposing yourself to cold water is, of course, a much more potent way to do it. But we can also get into how that activates your brown fat.
That's fascinating. So I did a little quick and dirty back of the napkin math. So 24 degrees, you see no change. And just for my US listeners, in Fahrenheit, that's about 75 degrees. So that's like room temperature. That's like not warm necessarily, not too cold. That's like a very comfortable, like essentially room temperature. And then they turned it down to, again in Fahrenheit, 66 degrees. Which is, that's fairly cold, but it's not extreme. It's not like extreme cold.
But it's fairly cold.
Yeah. And what degree, like what magnitude of an effect did they see? Like how much did the brown fat increase?
I don't remember the exact number, how much it actually increased, but you could tell also from the pictures. But I will have to look that up if I have to say a specific number from that. But what I think is fascinating about that was also that in that month where these obese and type 2 diabetic subjects in the study slept at 19 degrees or 66 degrees Fahrenheit, they had also an increased insulin sensitivity. So there are many people telling me, well, the brown fat doesn't matter. Do you think it matters? And I'm like, yeah, it matters, because if you expose yourself continuously to some kind of cold, you will activate the brown fat, and it will also work better when you're not in the cold. So it only shows that this behavioral change for just 1 month can actually increase the insulin sensitivity, even in subjects, even in people who have already a metabolic disturbance. And that is actually those people who are really hard to changing their metabolism, because it's already disrupted in a way, right? So it really shows that you can actually do something to increase your metabolism just by doing some behavioral changes. And insulin sensitivity is a huge deal. That is, it sounds very unsexy, I think, but it's like, just like blood pressure, it is very important measurements, and really, really important for, you can say, determine whether you are in a risk of metabolic diseases and lifestyle diseases in general. So if we can increase insulin sensitivity and also lower the blood pressure, which they also see, then you are in the lower risk of getting cardiovascular diseases and outcomes.
That's amazing. So
it's amazing, yeah.
Yeah, so cold in a way is like a form of medicine. I mean, hypothetically, I'm not familiar with this study, but I mean, that could hypothetically, correct me if I'm wrong, lead to a reduction in the need for medication for these patients.
Yeah, so what I have studied, from the angle I have studied this, is in healthy subjects. And I love that there are also studies like the one I just told you about, so obese subjects and type 2 diabetic subjects. So definitely there is a preventive tool here. but there seems also to be a curing tool. It's very potential, at least. So there is a potential for the brown fat to help us even prevent or cure diseases in cardiometabolic dysfunctions. So I really think that this is something that we need to study even more and get more into. But I don't know if we should talk about my study now. But
no, I would. I would love to. Yeah. Walk us through, and before you get to your specific research, your background, and why you came to make this your life's work.
Yeah, so I really started this many years ago. I wanted to study preventive medicine. I was working at the hospital and taking care of very sick patients. I used to be a nurse, not for many years, but I was actually a nurse before I went back to the university and became a scientist. So I've been in school my whole life, besides the 5 years as a nurse. But as I studied as a nurse, I really saw the problem. I was probably not like most nurses, but I loved all the science, so I brought that to work every day. And I was teaching patients and also my colleagues, and I was questioning everything all the time and saying, well, if these patients come here with all these cardio problems, they had blood clots in their legs and got amputated. It was really, really a place where people were miserable, I must say. So I saw the worst, of course, cases. But that also led me to think, well, if only they knew what to do before they went there, if only they could have known a more preventive lifestyle, a good preventive lifestyle for this, they would not maybe have ended up like this. So I was just thinking, we are curing the disease. We are doing so much for people who are already sick. I really wanted to go back to university and study preventive medicine. How can we lower the root cause of this? Because I was asking, how did we come to this? What is the root cause of all these diseases? And that was inflammation. So I wanted to go into metabolism and inflammation, and that's where I started. I started not with the brown fat, I started with something else, but eventually I moved on to the brown fat and wanted to see how can the brown fat activate our metabolism and lower inflammation in the body. So and brown fat, studying what I just told you, I came to realize that, well, if I don't want to make a pill, and that was not what I wanted to do, then I needed to do something behavioral. What can people do to activate their brown fat? That was my question after reading a lot of literature. Sleeping in a cold room, I found out, okay, good idea. I can tell people that. But they could also go outside in a T-shirt if it's cold and get used to the cold. Good idea. You're saying no. But you could also just walk outside barefoot a bit. That is also going to activate your brown fat. So now I was thinking, isn't there any activity we could do? Like exercise. Well, exercise also activates your brown fat. So I was like, okay, but do we have something else with the cold? Because the most potent activator of the brown fat is the cold. So I was like, okay, what about winter swimmers? We have so many in Denmark. And that's really how it started. Me doing this research without being a winter swimmer myself and actually being very afraid of the cold myself.
What does it mean to be a winter swimmer?
So it's a good question. I use this term as if everybody knows what it is, but it's good that you ask me. So being a winter swimmer in Denmark doesn't really mean that you are swimming exactly. You don't have to swim. We just have this, I think it's a very, it's a little bit romantic term for doing cold exposure, just dipping in the water. But some swim a bit. I do actually. And sometimes I just do a dip, but we also just everything we just call this winter swimming. So and it's also because we have the open sea. If I had a top, I wouldn't call it winter swimming. So I think that's the difference. And we have so much water here in Denmark. We don't have, I think 50 kilometers is like the longest distance one person in Denmark has to the sea. So everybody has the ability or the option to drive out to the ocean and take a swim. Although
That's amazing.
50 kilometers is a lot, but yeah.
Does it get easier the more you do it? I mean, do you acclimate? Because I feel like one of the things that's, that almost anybody can recognize about getting into cold water is that it's it's not exactly a walk in the park. Like there's a mental hurdle that you have to get over, especially if you're naive to the process, right? Does that get easier the more you do it?
Yeah, I don't know. Do you do cold exposure? Do you do any cold plunging, or do you do any yourself, Max?
I do. Yeah. I don't do it. I go through phases where some months I'm doing it very regularly. And then other times I kind of fall off, and in LA, it's difficult because, some of us who live in LA, like our showers don't actually get very cold. It's just like a phenomena, it's like chronically warm in Los Angeles, especially in the summer months. But occasionally, if like my gym, for example, has a shower that somehow is able to get very cold. And then sometimes there are places where I'll have access to like a cold plunge. I don't have one personally, like in my home, but I was for a long time going to a spa. I had a membership at a spa that had a cold pool, and it got down to, I believe, 40 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit, which I think is around 10 degrees Celsius or lower, possibly.
That's pretty cold. Yeah,
it's pretty cold, and I love it. But I notice that, when I'm in that routine, the more that I'm doing it, the easier it is for me to get in. And then when I stop going, it's, it feels like I'm having to acclimate all over again.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, maybe that's how you remember it, but there's actually a scientific study. Now I'm going to tell you something that probably I hope it will give you some relief. So
yes,
there are some studies showing that naive winter swimmers who have been never tried this before, of course, but then the researchers measured their breathing rate, and also other stress factors and blood samples and how they reacted to the cold. So to see how adapted they are to, or how well they respond to the cold. So cold pressure test and stuff like that. That is a validated test to test these things out. And then they tested that after they have been winter swimming for a couple of months, and saw that the breathing rate was going down when they were exposed to a cold dip in the laboratory, and they saw that they were getting cold adapted. Then they paused for a year, and then they started up again in the lab to see if they were back to where they started as naive winter swimmers, and they were not. So it really shows that even though you only want to become a seasoned winter swimmer, so in Denmark that will be starting from October going to April, and then you will pause during the summer and start again in October or November or around that time, the body will remember this and you will not be back to where you started. So even though it feels for you as if you have never done that before, your body does remember this. And I think it's insane. I can actually feel it too. When I have like a month where I didn't have the ability to go, if I'm maybe out traveling on holiday or whatever, and I come back and I take a cold plunge, then I feel that it's a bit more stressful than usually, but I'm definitely not back then when I was a cold sissy back in the day. So that was severe, I must say. I was like screaming in the water. I think the whole Copenhagen could hear me.
No. I'm gonna trust the science on this one. I think for me it's mental. It's just that like it's a routine thing. Yeah. It's like once I'm in the routine. But no, I feel for me it's like primarily, and I would love for you to speak more about the metabolic health benefits, which of course we've already touched on, but in terms of potentially increasing calorie burn and all that stuff. But for me, I think the most pronounced effect and benefit that I get from it is like to my mental health.
Yeah, but that's also what you actually can feel, and you can feel the difference in. When we talk about the metabolic health, you cannot feel the difference, but the differences are there. You can just not feel them, you cannot see them. But what you can see and maybe not see, but you can feel that your mental resilience is getting also better. You can feel more focused. You can feel that you have more energy. And that is because of the neurotransmitters that increase in your brain when you submerge into the cold water, or if you take a cold shower, or whatever kind of cold exposure you do get a dose depending on the exposure that you do. So if you do a cold plunge, you will have a huge increase in noradrenaline up to 2.5, up to five-fold actually, if you can stay there for maybe a couple of minutes. And also dopamine will increase the same amount and actually stay there in your body, in your mind, in your brain for hours afterwards, up to 4 hours. So it really shows hours.
Wow.
Yeah, hours afterwards. So it really makes sense when people say that it gives them a lot of drive, it gives them a lot of focus and motivation, and to go and do the things that they are going to do that day. And it lasts for the rest of the day. So it's a good idea to do this early in the morning, because then you really have the energy to really get started with your day. But yeah, so as you say, this is important for you for your mental health. And a lot of people say that, but I just want to say that the one thing that you cannot feel is what happens also in the body, but it's a holistic thing. So when you do the cold exposure, you will lower the inflammation in the body, and you will lower your blood sugar, your fat in your blood. And all of this is going to activate your immune system as well. And eventually you will have a lower immune response to this, because you lower your inflammation in the body. And you can measure that on blood pressure. So winter swimmers, adapted winter swimmers, have been we have seen in science that after just one winter swimming season, and that's, if people don't know that, but it's 3, 4, 5 months of doing cold exposure, dipping, swimming. And that corresponds to doing that for one season. But then you lower your blood pressure. And I think that shows that by lowering your inflammation in your body, you will also have benefits actually mentally. So inflammation has, after the millennium, been linked to depression, anxiety, and those are really some of the main lifestyle diseases that we have today. Stress and inflammation are the root causes of all our modern lifestyle diseases, and why we have number one reason of death is the cardiovascular diseases. So if we can lower this root cause, even though you cannot feel it from the cold, and when you do the cold exposure, it is still happening, and it helps on your mental health, and it helps on your cardiovascular health. So it really is a holistic thing that is happening.
It's so true. I mean, I've never suffered from clinical depression, but I've been depressed, and I've been anxious. And I find that there's nothing quite like cold immersion as a forced state change for me. I mean, I could have like mental cobwebs. I could be ruminating on life stressors and things like that. But the minute I get into that cold water, it's like everything kind of goes away. And you're right in that that sensation sustains. It's like it really is a powerful tonic for mental health that I wish more people had access to.
It is. Yeah, I wish so too. I now realize that there are places in the world that they of course have better or easier access to cold water, but there are places like, for example, in LA, as you just said, you don't have easy access. But if you can, for some reason, if you can get a tub, many people have a tub in their house. You can buy something at the grocery stores, like a bucket. What are they called? The big ones.
Yeah, like a big bucket. I actually once bought on Amazon like a tub that they use to feed horses. Like, exactly. I don't know what that's called. A trough. I don't know. So like a big Rubbermaid, I think, tub that I filled up with my brothers with a hose one summer. And then we went and we bought tons of ice, and we dumped the ice in there, and it was amazing.
Fantastic. Actually, there was a lot. I had a journalist in Denmark writing me. She did a huge interview for me when I released my recent book called Thermalist. It's not out in English yet, but it's out in Danish. I released it only 2 months ago. But she read my book and she was totally captured by this concept. So she bought a bin, like a big one, put it in her garden and sent me a picture of her like sitting in that huge green bin. And it was so hilarious. And I was like, why not? She didn't have time to drive to the ocean. So I was like, that's the way you do it. It doesn't really matter what you can find something that is not that expensive, and getting these kind of tools is like the weight that you also buy for exercise, for example. You have to invest just a little bit, but in time, I think people will realize that doing this kind of investment is like investing in your mental health and your physical health. Just like going to the gym, you pay for the membership, or you buy equipment for your home gym or whatever. And these kind of equipments is just going to be added to that. When people realize how good this is for your health and for your mental health, I think people will start to realize that it's a good idea to find some way to get your cold exposure at least. So
I love it. Have there been, because I'm pretty well versed on the prospective research that they've done out of Finland, where they look at like frequent sauna use and they associate it to different disease outcomes, whether it's hypertension, Alzheimer's disease, dementia, cardiovascular disease, stroke, even early all-cause mortality. Has that research been done yet with regard to cold water immersion? Do we know whether or not cold water immersion or cold immersion in general associates to reduced risk for different disease outcomes?
No, so we don't have that isolated, at least without the sauna. I think that the Finnish sauna study is not only on saunas. It's also on cold immersion or cold exposure in some way, because the Finnish style is also rolling in the snow or buckets of cold water. They do different things, or submerging into the cold water. So they have different things that they also contrast with when doing the saunas. So that is also the way they do it, actually. Yeah. So, but this Finnish sauna cohort is only focusing on the sauna piece or the sauna because they do more sauna than they do cold exposure. But we really need a study, a long-term study, where we can see what happens on the long term when we do cold water immersions, cold exposure in general. But we have to, in a study like that, you will have to like fix one kind of cold exposure to not vary too much in different ways with cold showers and stuff like that. But if we did a study, a long-term study where we follow people like in the sauna cohort for 20 years, we will be able also to see how that is affecting our cardiovascular health. That would be interesting.
Super important. I mean, you could also do like, you could do, I mean, there's like studies that you could do leading up to that, like, you know, where you like retrospective studies, you know, with questionnaires, looking at people who regularly do this stuff and see how their health fares, right? At the very least. Yeah,
no, that would not, I'm not really sure if that would be a good idea, because when you ask people, they a winter swimmer who have been doing this for 20 years would just say, I'm fantastic. I feel more fantastic because you would have to have like hardcore measures, just talking from a scientific view. It's just that you really need these parameters to be measured every year so you can follow this. But what we can maybe look at is studies where they have taken, for example, in my study, we took already adapted winter swimmers who have been winter swimming for 2 to 3 seasons. And then we measured up against a control group who have never done any kind of cold exposure or heat exposure. And from that study, and this is contrast therapy, right? So that was both the cold and heat, but we did see that their cardiovascular health is better than the control group, because the winter swimmers had more activation of the brown fat, and they were warmer, and they had a lower insulin production, as I just mentioned before, also seen in other studies. So that really just adds up with everything that we have seen, and lower blood pressure. So it really shows that they have only done this for 2 to 3 years more of cold exposure compared to a matched control group was same age, same BMI, same fitness level, and also diet was the same. So they were very equal in that way. There was one vegetarian in each group as well. So they were pretty much doing the same in their lives, besides the intervention group who did cold exposure and heat. They were just doing that. So I think these studies, we will see some it gives us like a proof of concept, and we can see, okay, maybe this would be interesting to do in a long follow-up study. So I really think that we need that study to see what happens. So, and we call those observational studies, but you are completely right. We need these studies in the future. I hope someone is working on it.
Oh my God. Yeah. I'd love to somehow be involved in that. Cause I mean, I would speculate that with the, reduction in inflammation, the reduction in blood pressure. I mean, these are all major wins for the cardiovascular system, but also for the brain, for brain health as a preventative tool, potentially for conditions like Alzheimer's, which we know are, one of the next great epidemics of the world.
Yes, exactly. I totally agree. There is also a link between doing saunas and actually having a lower risk of developing Alzheimer's diseases. And that is shown in that observational cohort that you just mentioned before with the sauna cohort from Finland. And I really think that this is not necessarily about the temperature being very high or being very low. It's because you are stressing the body in a healthy way. And by doing that, you create what is called hormesis. So hormetic stress in the cells is going to repair the cells and make them stronger. So you live longer, but you also activate all the immune system, and that's all going to decrease the inflammation, and that will decrease all these lifestyle diseases that you just mentioned. So I think it's just a whole body workout to do the cold and the heat exposure, but just not do it extremely, because that's just going to tiring the body and make it actually age faster. So it's also about finding that balance where you don't overdo it, because you want to be tough, or you want to be, I see that a lot, that people try to like push it and stay longer. And that is why we need these studies, observational studies, so we can see what if you do too much and when is actually too much. So we see how does that affect the heart? Is it becoming too much of a stressor? And how does that affect us? So we do see from sauna in the observational study that if you go over 30 minutes in a sauna and you do that many times per week, we do see that the benefits fade away. So plateau out, or even the risk again is increasing. So it seems to be a window that we want to find out where is that. And I think that we have found a kind of a way or a minimum dose, at least in my study, but we kind of don't know how much is the limit, the higher threshold. I think we should find that.
Yeah, absolutely. What is the minimum dose? I mean, does it differ person to person, or is there like a more generalized recommendation that can be made based on your research?
Yeah, so what we can say from my research is that 11 minutes per week divided on 2 to 3 days with 3 dips each day is what was done in the winter swimmers, which was healthy for them. And by that, we did see a higher activation of brown fat and an increased insulin sensitivity. And they also had a better glucose balance, meaning that their metabolism was faster at getting rid of sugar, which they have just been taking. So I measured that in a test I did in all the participants. So we could totally see that the metabolism was just faster. So 11 minutes per week in cold water, you can build that up. Just to say to your listeners who are maybe not exposed or used to the cold water, you don't do that in the first week. You build this up and it takes some time. But that is also the process. It's just like exercise. You don't start out running a marathon. You start out by running 2 kilometers. So you start out in the cold doing maybe 5 seconds, then you do 30 seconds, and you build that up until you reach 1 to 2 minutes, which is actually enough, because then you have already come over your cold shock And when you do that, you will start also shivering, and that is time to get up. So when you do that, then you have already gotten all the benefits that you would expect to get out of this.
Wow. So when you start shivering, that's the cue to get out.
That's a really good question. I think it's a really good cue, because at that point you have already reached the amount of benefits that we can expect that you get in the water, which we will see from the metabolism side, and also from the timing that we have seen when noradrenaline and dopamine increase in the brain from studies of cold exposure. So it really hits at the same time. So you can say when you get into the cold water and you have been there for maybe sit there for a couple of minutes, you will start shivering at some time. Some people get so adapted that they just can stay so long, because you can say like the skin adaptation make your skin almost like a shield. So you get so good at contracting your capillaries in the skin that you almost don't take the cold in. But that is when you need to like judge whether you should maybe come up way before that, because shivering is maybe not then your threshold when you get too adapted, or you get very adapted. But maybe look at the timing then. So 1 to 2 minutes should be enough for you for activating your brown fat, definitely. And when you start shivering, maybe not in the water then if you are adapted, but then when you get up, just stand in the wind for a bit. You can also just end on the cold. Don't go into the sauna if you have that, or hot tub or if you have that, or not hot shower, but just heat up by yourself, force your body to heat up by itself. That is also going to activate your brown fat and your muscles even more. And that increases your metabolism. It's like a workout, your after workout, after your cold plunge. So that, I think that part is such a huge part of doing this kind of activity for your health, that I always say that it's a good idea to end cold. Don't go into the heat for the first 1 or 2 hours, because then your body needs to use energy to heat yourself up again. And that is a really good exercise.
That's fascinating. Yeah. And that's so practical too, because like, I think a lot of people will dabble with cold water immersion, and then, it's just so uncomfortable that they'll want to immediately afterwards put the shower on the warm setting, or jump into the hot tub, or, the sauna or what have you. But it's actually, you're making your body work to regenerate that heat, to regain homeostasis essentially. And it's like in that work is where the a lot of the benefit seems to be gained.
Yeah, exactly. And what I also think is important is that, especially if you're new, you probably don't know about this, but when you're in the water, you should think that this is actually not where I will be the coldest. The coldest you will be is when you get up, because that is where your blood vessels will open again, and all the cold tissue, or the warm blood that is in your core, is gonna go out to all your cold tissue and be cooler, and then it goes back to your core, and that makes your core temperature drop. So your core temperature will decrease after you get up, and that will make you shiver. So if people out there have experienced what is called the after drop, where you shiver on the couch when you get home because you were like, oh, I just did a cold exposure, a cold swim, a cold dip, and I am shivering on my couch, something is wrong. It is not wrong. It's just your body functioning perfectly well. As long as you don't feel uncomfortable, like mentally getting dizzy or something, then everything is fine. It's just your body working. It's just that. So you can work that adaptation up by ending on the cold. I always say, keep moving after the cold swim. Just keep moving afterwards. Just walk home, clean your kitchen or whatever. Just keep walking, or maybe do a run afterwards if you can, depending on who you are, of course. But just keep working that body. Don't sit still, because that's going to make your after drop even worse. So, yeah.
I love this. It's analogous. It's analogous to physical exercise. It's like you go to the gym where you provide the stimulus for your muscles to adapt, but they're not actually adapting in the gym. You're providing the stimulus in the gym. They adapt outside of the gym with your nutrition.
Outside of the gym.
Yeah. Like after the gym, over the following 48 hours, post workout.
Yeah.
And so it's,
exactly.
I guess it's similar.
This is like the most important part of like doing the cold exposure is not to stop that process, because if you stop it immediately, of course the heat has its own like benefits. If you use the sauna, it has overlapping benefits, definitely. But ending on the cold is like it is more stressful for the body to heat up afterwards than it is to cool down. So if you have to heat up, you have to move yourself. So it's kind of like the post-exercise that you do. So yeah, and this is what Andrew Huberman has now called, or giving a name. It's called the Soberg principle, and I think it's very nice of him to give this a name. How to end your cold exposure.
I love that. That's hilarious. Yeah, I mean, I'm such a huge fan of cold exposure, and I think it's yeah. I mean, the benefits that I've seen just in my own personal life are like so profound and pronounced. It's something that I really do wish that I could do every day. You know, I just don't have. It's unfortunate in LA. You know, in my own home, my shower doesn't actually go. It doesn't go south of warm. It's either warm or hot. It's very frustrating.
Oh, yeah. Oh. Okay. Yeah. Ice. Yeah. Then you need to buy ice. I think that's expensive too, right?
It can be expensive, and it's like, I feel like I'm wasting water or something, you know, but yeah. But I love that, like, you know, it's really the minimal effective dose, 11 minutes per week. And you said that can be divided up. So, I mean, this is not a huge hurdle.
No, exactly. And when you say you wish you could go every day, I just want to say you don't even have to do this every day. I think it's important not to do it every day, because you get also too adapted and you go over your maybe too many minutes also. So you have to think about this kind of stress as very extreme as well. So it's not something you have to do very much. It's just something that you have to do once in a while, and maybe even not on the same days, just to mix it up, to keep that hormetic stress going on and changing out the balance a bit. So you will always a bit surprise yourself in the body. So that is just like the repetition when you do go to the gym and you only use the same weight on your weights, or run the same amount of miles, you will not grow, you will not increase, you will not be better. So you have to change it all the time. So changing the temperature of your water, that will be one thing. Not only going down, because at some point you cannot get colder, right? So also going up a bit and then change it down a bit and up again. But also the amount of time. Sometimes do a shorter dip, sometimes go up to 2 minutes if you can, if you are getting adapted to it. But changing things will always make your cells in the body work more. And that is whether you're doing exercise, that is what, if you're doing cold exposure or heat exposure, it's just hormetic stress to the to the cells.
Yeah. So what I mean, obviously we can't make hyper personalized recommendations because everybody's different, but as like a starting template, like how would you divide up those 11 minutes per week? And also, what temperature are we talking about? Yeah,
we are talking about various temperature, as I just said. But per definition, we can say that cold water is 15 degrees Celsius and below. How many Fahrenheit is that? I don't really know, but
15 Celsius to Fahrenheit. That's about 60 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah. And below that, that's going to be cold water per definition in scientific reports. So you can say it's cold water from below that. But I want to say that if you do cold water at 19 degrees, you will also have an activation of your brown fat and your nervous system. So it's just the dose that you are varying here. So 15 degrees Celsius and below is going to be cold water for you. The amount of time, I would say the 11 minutes could be like a rule of thumb or something you can go for or aim for. But it varies in people, of course, depending on their nervous system. Some people have a more sensitive nervous system, and then I would say maybe do less. And also, everybody should start out very slow. I would never recommend anyone, and I have taught people in my studies, my subjects, how to become winter swimmers from being naive winter swimmers, never tried that before. And we started out by just doing a dip, very short, 2 seconds, 5 seconds, or whatever. Some of them were a bit more cold adapted, and they could do a little bit longer. So it really also depends on your starting point. Some people are just more comfortable in the cold, and some people have avoided this for so many years that they are very sensitive to it. And it also really impacts we can say your stress level. So this is your nervous system, not only being physical sensitive, but also you will be more mentally sensitive to stress. So you can also use the cold as a way of widen your window for stress, because you are exposing yourself to it in a deliberate way, and you can control it, even though you don't feel it when you are in it. But in that situation, you do know logically that you are there on purpose. So you just use your breath to lower your stress level. And that could be like a training center for your nervous system as well, to get more comfortable being uncomfortable in places or in situations where you feel anxious about something. It could be an interview, or you often get anxious being in open places, or it could be so many things. But you can use this kind of way of getting used to a little bit of pain and a little bit of anxiety to use that in your life. So it's not only on the physiological level, but also on the mental level for stress widening in your life.
Yeah, I mean, at risk of sounding woo-woo, like there's almost like a spiritual component to it. I mean, like you put yourself through the gauntlet of the cold, and it prepares you in many ways for other stressors in life. There's like a spillover effect.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, a spillover. Yeah, I like that.
Super interesting.
It seems like it is. And I've seen people go from, in my studies, there was this guy who, he was so stressed. And I was really wondering, why are you in this study? Because you really don't have time. And he had this huge company. And I think he was just a CEO who wanted to do everything. And you know the type, right? They want to do everything. And he wanted to become a winter swimmer because he found it very nice and romantic. He really wanted to go out and have some peace for himself. So he did know there was some kind of component to this he had heard about, which was very beautiful, at least. And he really wanted that for himself. But he was so stressed. Every time he came to the lab, he was so angry. And he told me a lot, oh, my employees, they were so and so, and he told me that he was screaming at people in the car because they were driving in front of him, and I was like, is that usually how you do and how you respond? I said, yeah, I am very angry. I am. And he told, the reason why I remember this so well is because he told me that he had a problem with this. A few months after becoming a winter swimmer, he came in, another person, and me and the team, we were like looking at each other like, what is going on?
Wow.
He was like smiling and very calm. And we were like, what happened to him? And then we had to ask him, I was like, what happened to you? Because you seem different. And then he told me that some people at his work had noticed that when he came in the morning, he was suddenly smiling. And he was certainly not angry or he was just in another spirit, so happy. And they told him this at a meeting. They were like, okay, you have changed a bit. What happened? And then he told them, well, I don't know, but maybe I started winter swimming and I've done this for 2 or 3 months. And they were like, that's it. So I really think this one came really took me and him by surprise, because I didn't tell him about like the mental and the mental benefits of this. We only talked about the benefits of inflammation and brown fat, but this was kind of like the things that what you touched upon before, the things that you can really feel. That is what makes people also motivated to do it in their everyday life when it gets tough. Oh, I don't want to go to the gym, but it makes me happy afterwards. I do not want to go to the cold water, but you do know it makes me more focused, more clear, less anxious for the rest of the day. So these things are very important because it also motivates people to go out and do it. And it helps them with their physical health as well.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Listerine effect. It's like people like to feel like whatever it is that they're using, whether or not it's having a positive effect, they like to feel, there's like there's like the burn aspect of it, of like the mouthwash, you know, like when people swish with mouthwash, they like feeling the burn because to them, it sends a signal that it's doing something, whether or not it's doing something, like who knows, you know, it's probably in fact harming. I mean, I've talked about this quite a bit in the past, you know, that we actually don't want to use antiseptic mouthwash, but it's like the burn, people seek the burn. It's like, it reinforces the placebo effect, which is, you know, obviously
intoxicating or something.
Yeah, I mean, you have like hard clinical data, right? So this is clearly not just the placebo effect, but like, you know, if the placebo effect is playing even somewhat of a role, like why not? Like there could be benefits to that as well, right? Particularly with regard to mental health.
Yeah, I agree. It's so fascinating.
I want to talk about like the body, you know, the types of exposure on the body. For example, like when we are head out, you know, immersed in cold water, or if we're in a shower, do we necessarily need to be hitting certain parts of our bodies with the water? Is it more effective if we, you know, are hitting our face? I've heard that if you cool your hands down, there's some potential benefit there. Do we have to be hitting our collarbone and our spinal column to activate the full breadth of brown fat benefits, et cetera, et cetera?
Oh,
a lot of different questions there.
Oh, that's a lot of questions. But to sum up, you want to know what body parts will do what benefits.
Yes.
So if you do cold water immersion, I would suggest to submerge. If you are new, you can do like a halfway through. If you are that sensitive to the cold, you can also just submerge up to the navel, and that will also be fine. But if you can get through breathing through the cold shock, then you can go down to the shoulders or up to the neck. Some find it quite painful to go all the way up to the neck, or almost up to the what is this called?
Chin.
The chin. Some people find that a bit painful. So usually when I just dip in the water, I also just go to the shoulder. And when I swim, I of course have to do it to the neck. That's how it is. But you don't have to dunk your head, for example, when you do cold plunges. You don't have to, because you already expose so much of your body to the cold, and there are so many cold receptors. It's full activated. Everything is full activated at this point, anyways. Of course, the head. You will activate the vagus nerve, so you could put water to the face. And the reason why I'm not saying that people should not do a head dunk. I'm just telling you what happens when you do. And there's also a safety component to this. So when you do the head dunk, you will have when you submerge just the body, there's a research study from Canada showing where the researchers have compared heat loss from when you submerge the body up to the neck, and also compared to heat loss when you also dunk the head. And what they saw was that you have a heat loss rate of 11% when you submerge up to the neck. And when you then also dunk the head, then you will increase the heat rate loss by 36%. So that's compared to the 11%. And the reason why I think this is important is that the head is a fast track to cooling down your core, because there is no tissue from the head to the core, and the big blood vessels are in your neck, right? So there is nothing there to hold the cold back from cooling your core temperature. So that means that you will have an increased heat loss rate of 36%, even more, meaning that you are very faster getting hypothermic. So depending on where you are you able to get up right away? So it really depends on what you're doing here, of course. Also, there's the other component to it. When you submerge the body into cold water, you will have activation of your sympathetic nervous system. And just by that, you will have a lower blood flow to the brain, which is like 30 to 40% compared to when you are not in cold water.
Wow.
So you can now add these things together, like less blood flow to the brain, and also heat loss from the head and the core, you could get lightheaded. And I guess some people must be nodding out there thinking, oh, I tried that. Yeah, and that could also be because you are also hyperventilating and or whatever, because hyperventilation also increases the sympathetic nervous system, giving you less oxygen to the brain. So all these components together can be a potential risk. So that's why I'm saying that if you are new, maybe don't dunk the head, or just in general, don't dunk the head. There's no reason to it.
Yeah. Well, it's higher risk, but is there no reason to it? I mean, if you are adapted to some degree to cold immersion, because the heat loss is so dramatic with dunking your head, couldn't you potentiate some of the benefits that we've been talking about by just dunking your head for a few seconds?
I think the face is enough. You don't have to have the whole head, and you can do like a face wash in the morning, for example, also, and that's not going to do all the things that we just talked about. So it's when you put the things together, it's like the whole body submerging into cold water, and then also the head dunk afterwards, and that's depending on also how long time did you stay in the water, or so it's just increasing the risk of hypothermia, and it's, you don't feel it's a risk until it becomes a risk for you. I have had people writing me like, I'd never thought about this until I actually got dizzy from it, and that's usually how things work, right? You are not thinking too much about it until you actually feel some of the things you have heard, and you're like, wow, now I actually know what you're talking about. So I'm just saying that people should know about this and take their own precautions.
Are there any science-backed health benefits to just splashing cold water on your face?
So I have found studies where they have looked at whether you can activate the vagus nerve by cooling your face. And you can actually do that. So splashing water to the face for one splash is not going to do the trick. I think it's going to activate also your sympathetic nervous system. But you really have to do it sometimes. But it's not going to give you all the benefits of activation of the brown fat in the same amount as doing a cold immersion or a cold shower. But it can be like the middle way where you say, well, this is what I have time to do this morning, so I'll just splash water to my face, and then you will also have an increase in noradrenaline and give you energy and dopamine as well. So it's going to do some of the same things, but it's not going to be the same amount of benefits. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I know that it feels good. I mean, it definitely feels good, even just one splash of water to the face. But I guess it's probably not. Yeah. That's more a superficial effect. You mentioned that it can activate the vagus nerve. What is that about? What are the benefits? What is the vagus nerve, and what are the benefits of activating it?
Yeah, so the vagus nerve is our, see if I can say it in English, the words. So it's our 10th cranial nerve. And when you activate that is like, it's the part of our body which we cannot deliberately activate, like thinking about it, and then we cannot do that. So we will have to do some kind of behavioral things, like splashing water to our face or submerging in cold water. That's going to do the trick. You can also do other things like humming, or there are different things that science has actually shown can activate the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is super good to activate because it activates the parasympathetic nervous system. So that is the rest and digest part of our autonomous nervous system. So when you go into cold water, you want to switch from the fight and flight mode, so that is the sympathetic nervous system, to the rest and digest parasympathetic nervous system. And you can do that by activating your vagus nerve. If you can do that, then it will go faster, and you will have all the benefits from going into that mental balance, mental mood, where you have an increase in serotonin. And that's also why you feel a little bit more as if you are flying afterwards. So you feel more in mental balance. And yeah, that's probably also the dopamine. But wow. I think the serotonin is going to give you that balance afterwards. Yeah.
Wow. So is it like, So obviously we've talked about like cold water immersion. It's a form of hormetic stress. You're activating your sympathetic nervous system. Is there like, the more you acclimate, is it like you're reducing your sympathetic activation and turning up the dial on your parasympathetic? Is that kind of like what happens over the acclimation, over the course of acclimation? Like it's something that once was like full on sympathetic, and then the more time, the more you do it, it's like you're actually like able to tap more into that parasympathetic state. Is that sort of like indicative of acclimation?
I think you can say it that way. I think it's a good way to say it, actually. What happens is that when you build the adaptation, it's like three things that happens with your metabolism. So there is the hormones increasing when you do cold water immersion, but it's also how well your cardiovascular system adapts to the cold and making that shield to protect you from getting hypothermic, because we have to think about the cold as an enemy. It is. That's why we react this way, and we also get some benefits from it if we don't overdo it. But the body has to react as if it's an enemy. So it builds itself stronger also by building you stronger. So by doing how it does that is by making your capillaries even better, or blood vessels better at contracting.
Wow.
So so it's kind of like you build a shield so the cold won't get into your body and kill you if you were supposed to be there. I find this fascinating study on fishermen, where they have, I want to tell you about this study because it really shows how well the body can actually adapt to the cold. So when they have had their hands in cold water cleaning the fish, and they have done this for years, right? They were tested in a laboratory to see if they were systemically cold adapted, and they were. So I find that very fascinating, that only by exposing the hands or parts of the body, you will get this systemic effect. But I think it makes sense because your blood vessels, everything, we are connected, right? It's one body, it's one mind. We are connected. So you don't have to think about your cold exposure journey as something that you cannot overcome because I cannot do a full body cold immersion the first time. You can take this in steps, and you will get adapted at some point. So when you're cold adapted, you will easily go from the sympathetic nervous system activation to the parasympathetic. So you will have a very short amount of time trying to like stress down, because your body is so adapted, both like physically but also mentally. So you are easier rested in the stress. So this is also a way of like talking about that window of stress, which you have just widened. So you can take more pain, you can take more stress without and still be at rest in the parasympathetic activation. So I think that adaptation is super good if you don't like overdo it, because that could be detrimental for other things. So.
No, it sounds like it's a tool to help tune up your nervous system, which is amazing, and make you more resilient and adaptive. That fisherman study is fascinating. Can you like extrapolate from that like people who are for whatever reason, maybe bedridden or unable for whatever reason to take cold showers or immerse themselves, or even like for somebody like me, for example, like could you hypothetically like do a poor man's version of cold water immersion by just getting a bowl, putting some ice in it, if you have like just a regular home ice maker, and putting your hands in it regularly?
Yeah, you can. And I tested this also in my subjects in all my studies. I did what we call a cold pressure test. While doing so, I also did some metabolic measurements. For example, I measured the brown fat activation. So what I could see when people immerse their hands into cold water, I saw that the activation of brown fat was there immediately.
Wow.
So what we know from the fisherman study I just talked about is that you get this adaptation systemically, but also my measurements show that the brown fat, which is up here, and that was also your question before, will get activated because the nerve endings in your hands, there are so many receptors there. They send signals to the brain so fast and activates the brown fat immediately from two kind of pathways. It will be directly from the skin to the brown fat, and there's a pathway up to the brain and to the brown fat. There's a third one, but you will not shiver from the muscles if you just do a hand immersion, of course. So you can think about this as a poor man's, what do you call it? A poor man's
cold
way
immersion. Yeah.
Cold immersion. Yeah, exactly.
No,
so
but
you can do that, but you won't get all the benefits as if you were if you compare it to a cold water immersion.
Yeah.
But it's a good start.
Yeah, no, I love it because it's like, well, for some, the full body cold water immersion could be potentially off limits, but insofar as you're still able to reap some of these metabolic health benefits, it's like a really probably the lowest possible barrier way of reaping some of these benefits.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I actually never really thought about that. You're completely right, because it's not a barrier for us to overcome cold water on the hands. We wash the hands all the time, so we're used to getting our hands exposed to water all the time. So it's not like an anxious barrier that we need to overcome. So hands is a good way to start. For some, it also could be the feet. So we have seen in studies where to see if we could activate the brown fat just by putting a foot in a cold bucket of cold water. And from these studies, these PET-CT scannings of people, we could see that even that could actually activate the brown fat, and we can see that from the picture from the PET-CT scanning. So just a foot in cold water is also effective, and it really shows what the brown fat is there for. It's so sensitive. It's connected to your nervous system, and your nervous system is sensitive too. I mean, as soon as you just step on a little stone or something, you can feel that on your foot, right? Your whole body is like connected in that way. So as soon as you just get a little bit cold on your hands or on your skin somewhere, your brown fat is going to sense that and completely, you could say, adapt or increase the heat enough to make that balance out the temperature. So your vital organ will be in the perfect room temperature for those. So the brown fat and the nervous system is really working well together to keep that house in the perfect temperature.
Wow. So freaking cool. We've talked about some of the metabolic health benefits. You talked about how cold immersion, the brown fat actually can suck fat out of the blood and help reduce things like triglycerides. But can cold water immersion, cold showers, and the like actually help us lose body fat?
So this has been shown in mice studies, in rodent studies, that they lose weight when they increase the amount of brown fat. They also increase what is called beige fat. So now we have all the colors of fat here. So we have the white fat, which we want to get rid of, which stores our energy and is our bad fat, or too much of it, at least if we have too much of it. Then we have the brown fat, which is our healthy fat, mitochondria rich, and we want to get more of it because then it will feed off of some of the white fat. But we can also grow what is called the beige fat. So the beige fat is essentially, we can grow that if we have what we call precursor cells, and we can stimulate that with cold, and that could turn into a more thermogenic cell. So being something in between the white and the brown, living in the white fat.
Whoa.
So that would be cool, right? And we have seen this in mice, but we have not found it yet in humans. But we imagine that this is what happens, but it is difficult in humans to like dig in there and just take out some fat and brown fat, because it's located again very closely to our central nervous system. And that is not a place where you really want to mess around and take fat out. So it's difficult studies to do in humans, but we see it in mice. And what we do know from the mice is that it's the fat is there, the kinds of fat is the same in mice and in humans, but it's more brown in mice than it is in humans. But it makes sense because the mice are also smaller and therefore needs more brown fat and more brownish fat to keep that temperature up in this little animal. And humans are much bigger. So we have bigger muscles, which will also help us increase our heat in the body and keep us warm. So we don't need it as much. And now we are coming to the problem. So imagine that we live in a society where we always are packing ourselves up in warm clothes, and we live in our perfectly well-temperatured houses, and we have heating in the floors. We have heating in the car. We are never cold. We are never exposed to any kind of like extreme stressors that is going to activate our nervous system and widen that window for stress and make us feel less painful being a little bit out of our comfort zone. So what happens is that the brown fat decreases. And I want to do a reference back to the study from sleeping in the cold. So we did see that sleeping in just a warmer temperature shows how plastic this tissue is. So you can grow it really fast if you have it, of course, and you can decrease it also. And if you can lose weight, we really want to see that study in humans. But we have not seen it like on kilos yet. But we do have studies like my own study, for example, showing that they have an increased energy expenditure, the winter swimmers, and they do have a better insulin sensitivity and faster glucose balance, meaning that they can get rid of all this very faster, the fat and the glucose, which we want, and that will mean they will also take from the storage. The white fat storage. So although we didn't see that they were losing weight, it shows that their metabolism is higher. So it could be the winter swimmers. That is the other thing, that we don't see people doing cold exposure being much leaner. But it could be because people get more hungry also when they increase their metabolism. So there is a balance there also. So when you go and exercise or you do cold exposure, you will also increase your hunger. And if you don't balance that out and make sure you are not eating more, then you would just see that people have the same weight, or at least, or maybe even gain weight, because they have this sudden hunger after they have done cold exposure. And people don't like being hungry today. That is also something that we need to work on, I think. Being hungry can be a good thing because it triggers everything that we were born to. And that is also to be without food for a certain amount of time. That is also a way to create this hormetic stress that I also talk about. So yeah. My motto is stress up to stress down. And I think it encompasses very much what we just talked about.
I love that. There was a study that came out a couple of years ago that found that, I don't know I forget if it was in animals or humans, but that fasting also increased brown fat.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. It does. So when you fast, you also are cooling down. So you will activate the brown fat also because of that, because it needs to also regulate the temperature in the body. So yeah, I think that could be one of the reasons, at least.
Wow, super interesting. Do we know if acutely being immersed in cold water boosts energy expenditure? Like, do we know if like we see an increase in our resting energy expenditure when we're in cooler temperatures?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that is a really good question. That was also one of the things that we looked at in my study. We wanted to see if winter swimmers, when they were exposed to cold, would they increase their energy expenditure more? And we did see that in our smaller study. I think that if we had a huge study, we would have seen a bigger difference. But it really makes sense when we also look at the other parameters, as insulin was better, glucose balance was, the glucose clearance from the blood was so much faster, meaning that if the metabolism is faster, the energy expenditure is also faster. And that was what we saw in this group as well. So it really makes sense that this kind of like acute extreme exposure to the cold will make your body also your metabolism much faster, because at reacting also to stressors. So you will have this increased metabolism because you or faster metabolism, increased energy expenditure. Sorry. Yeah.
Is there anyone who shouldn't be cold water immersing? Like, I don't know. I mean, there's so many different populations: children, pregnant women, you know, older adults. Like, who's like the most, I guess, like for whom is this something that could potentially be off limits?
I think that it's important to say that if you have a heart disease or you have unregulated high blood pressure, I would not say that it's safe for you, or it's for you to go and do this kind of sport or activity. Because what happens when you go and you submerge into cold water is you expose yourself to a cardiovascular conflict, an autonomic conflict between your sympathetic nervous system and your parasympathetic nervous system, right? So your heart rate wants to like go up from one of them and the other one going down, and that creates a little bit of a conflict to the heart in these initial moments where you go into the cold water. And if you have a heart problem and you have unregulated high blood pressure, this might not be right for you because of the arrhythmias to the heart that comes with submerging into the cold water and the cold shock. So there is a group of people, I would say, maybe it's not for you. And if you are not really certain about this and you want to make sure, and you are maybe also older and you have inflammation, could be different things, then go to your doctor and ask them, is this safe for me?
I feel like most doctors are probably like so in the dark about this research. It's like, that I would wonder how your average physician would respond to a question like that. Like, I feel like your average physician would be like, what do you even need it for? But they're probably so not up on all of this fascinating and empowering research, which is a shame, but it's good, I guess, to provide that disclaimer, because, of course, everybody's different and everybody has different risk profiles.
I completely agree. And I think it's just important that people also really think about how their health is before starting this. It's not something that just anybody can do. I think that especially the group that I just mentioned, they should think about having their blood pressure tested at their doctors. If they don't really know what to do with you, then I would say ask them to take your blood pressure. And you can say Susanna said that. Blood pressure as minimum, and also do some blood tests just to see how is your cardiovascular health. And also if you take heart medication, just figure out with your doctor, is this something that would be important to think about if the cold water as the cold water actually creates arrhythmias to the heart. And it does. It's very short, but it happens. And if you are healthy, this is not a problem. But if you are not, then yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's unfortunate today that, we as a society, we've become so frail and fragile. I feel like a lot of these different types of hormesis, cold immersion, saunas, even hormetic phytochemicals that we get from plants, plant material. Like, you do need to have a baseline level of resilience to be able to reap the full breadth of benefit from all of these different modalities and interventions, right? Which we are. Like, it's your birthright to be able to reap benefit from. Like, we've made it here after millennia of evolution to be able to endure cold water immersion. Like, this is something that's like hardwired into our DNA. But for so many of us struggling with metabolic illness and, just overexposure to the toxic food supply, sedentary lifestyles, et cetera, it's created this frailty that I think is, it's really unfortunate, but nonetheless widespread.
Exactly. I totally agree. It is really, really unfortunate that that we are almost like glass today. We are so unexposed to anything that could just at least create some kind of hormetic stress in our body, that we have now become so fragile that even just a small amount of stress could actually totally stress us out. It's no wonder actually that also stress is increasing. I'm not saying this doesn't have anything to do with society or the way that we work or technology. I think there's a huge problem there as well, especially with kids and young people. But I think that if we talk about how to react to that and how to overcome stress, that we don't have tools today without, other than what we are talking about now, we don't have tools which will really fit with our biology. But this is, as you said, something in our DNA. We were born this way. We survived this way. We were the only human species surviving. Maybe the others didn't have brown fat. That's why we survived.
It's amazing, though. It's like it's such an incredible legacy, to be like the torch bearer. I don't know if that's a word, but it's like, to be carrying now the torch for everybody who's come before, who really endured life and death situations to cultivate this resilience that we now like have inherited, and yet so many of us just allowed to become essentially vestigial, like a vestigial organ, essentially.
Yeah.
When there's so much benefit to be gained from tapping into those mechanisms, those pathways.
Exactly. I think that it's a shame, but I think it's because people don't know. People really don't. Maybe people don't know that this is actually something that is good for them. They don't know that these kind of like natural stresses, natural environments, and also behaviors that you can do yourself is potentially something that could change your life. People think that it has to come in a pill because we, for so many years, have been taught that when we do science, we always do science and pills, and we have to have a pill to cure everything, and you don't have to do anything before you are sick, because before that there is almost no system, right? There was nothing carrying you or doing anything for you. So we have been taught, our generation, that we don't have to really do anything. So all these behaviors that we are talking about now is really just something that it is really not that new, right? It's not something that is surprise for people, like, oh, the cold and heat, is that good for you? Some would just say, well, it's just dangerous, or they just say nay or whatever. But people do know that cold and heat is something that is in our environment, and we were also born there and we survived it. So of course it's going to do something good for us. So we just need to relearn, the body needs to relearn how we can fit this into our lives and how we also benefit from it. But it takes one thing, and that is courage to actually do it. And that is a difficult thing for many people, because that's going to stress them out at a point where they usually would just go away, right? Stress is not something people will seek. People will avoid it, instead of seeing it as something they need to face, because in that way they will become stronger and they will feel less painful when they are stressed. So we really need to like turn it around and say, well, you have to do something that is a little bit stressful for you, because then you will grow. And one day you will look back and you can say, I'm not that person anymore. I have grown.
Stress up to stress down. That's your saying, right?
Yeah.
I love it. No, it's so true. I mean, I like, and I've said this before, it's like sometimes life throws you stressors that you can't avoid. You just, whether it's relationship stress or financial stress, like stress is inevitable. And for the stressors that you can't avoid, I think a very productive strategy is to cultivate resilience to that stress, right? Like try to avoid stress as much as you can, but inevitably you're going to face some stress, and you should be doing the work beforehand. We should all be doing the work beforehand to cultivate the most resilient versions of ourselves, so that when that stress finally rears its ugly face, you're ready for it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I love that. I love the way you said that.
Yeah.
It's really important. It's preparing yourself for the life events which are stressful and which you really want to avoid. True.
100%. So looking forward into the future, what are you most excited about? What's coming up next for you, research wise?
So business-wise. So at the moment, I am teaching. So what I do here today, talking to you, is a part of my teaching. I teach at my school at soberginstitute.com, where I made courses teaching people these things that we talk about, how to do this step by step, because there's been such a huge interest, and I'm quite surprised actually after I finished my PhD that so many people want to learn this. And I didn't know at that time that the 10 years almost being in that I have gained so much knowledge that this is something people want to have afterwards. But it's very good because in that way I can tell people how to do this in a both safe and beneficial way. So I have made courses there on my website. Particularly one, I think, is the Thermalist course. Is good because you also learn how to get a functional breathing, because the breath work is going to help you stress down as well. It's going to be the key to your nervous system when you use the cold and also when you use the heat. So in that course, you will learn all three things and in a step-by-step program. So and also just launched my Thermalist journal, which is actually my newsletter. It's an extended newsletter where people also can come and learn a lot during, so they can learn a lot just by reading, or they can listen to my newsletter as audio. So I have been quite busy building this, kind of like teaching and communicating science, and that is what I do today.
That's amazing. And you're based in Denmark, right?
Yeah, I'm based in Denmark.
In Denmark. Amazing. I've never been. I would love to go. I'm going to be in, as I mentioned to you, I'm going to be in London in June, which I'm super excited. I love Europe and I don't get to go as often as I would like, but I'm super excited to be there. Speaking at the Health Optimization Summit. And one day I would love to come to Denmark because I just, I would love to become a winter swimmer.
Yeah, you should come and take a dip in the ocean. You should. It's so way different from doing it in a cold tub. It's just another way of getting in touch with nature. But I really think both ways are good. But doing it outside is just amazing. You should definitely come and try. You can also do that in London.
I want to. I'm gonna.
You have to.
Is sauna culture as big in Denmark as it is in Scandinavia?
So and Denmark is also part of the Scandinavia, but in Finland it's bigger. So in Denmark we don't really have a long sauna history. We have a very short one, but we have a very long winter swimming history. And in my courses, I also show these clips that we have from back in, I think the one clip I show is winter swimmers swimming. And this is from 1918, I think it was, one of the clips. And the other one is from 1945. And that was just right after the war, where we can see that people are jumping into the ocean and just swimming. And some of them were dressed out for carnival or something like that. You can just totally see how this is so cultivated into our culture that is why we still do it today. And we don't do it, or people who have done this for 20 years didn't do it for the health reasons, for metabolism and so, but it did help them mentally. If you ask them, they would say, this totally kept me stable throughout my life. And I think it's amazing that this is like part of so grounded in our culture. So I love that. That is also why I can teach it, I think, because this is something I grew up with this. I know about it. I know about how they did it. And everybody here knows the winter swimmer. So it's growing here too. And the sauna culture is fast growing here too. So we use it a lot. So every club here in Denmark has a sauna. So it's just become part of our culture now also. So we do the contrast therapy, just like I have shown in my research. So that is what I teach in my course. So I can give your audience a discount on the course if you want.
That would be amazing. Can you make like a code, like Genius?
Genius, yeah, that is a good one.
That's
I'll give them 10% for Genius, the code Genius.
There you go. And what's the URL again, just so people know?
Yeah, so it's soberginstitute.com. So it's SOEBRG institute.com. So they can go there and check out the 3-week course. Maybe you can give them a link. Maybe that is easier.
Yeah, we'll do that. Well, I'm envious because I wish that was more of a part of our culture here. I love cold water immersion, and I love saunas, and it's surprisingly difficult in Los Angeles to have access to a good, like a real sauna, real traditional hot sauna, and like a really good cold water immersion experience. So, and I'm also thrilled that you are such a loud and powerful advocate for this science. It's amazing. I think it's super empowering, and I look forward to
thank you.
To getting together in person at some point, hopefully in the not too distant future. I've got one. That'd be wonderful. One last question for you. But before we get to that, where can people connect with you on social media? You already talked about your course, but if people have want to connect with you on the gram or Twitter or whatever, how are you? I
think I'm on almost everything now. So they can find me primarily on Instagram. And also on Twitter. I'm on Facebook, but also I'm building a community in my Thermalist journal. So that is my newsletter, where we actually have a huge community where we can chat and we can share what we want to learn about. And so I am pretty much on all the social media, but so you can maybe put a link so they can find me.
Hey, if you like that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.